Before 25 million Americans, Jasmine Crockett stood in the Capitol holding a 69-page lawsuit that thundered through Washington. 3 former FBI executives, men who once led the nation's most critical investigations, now accuse Director Kash Patel of illegally purging agents simply because they touched Trump's cases. The chamber shook as Crockett's words cut like steel. Families cry, reporters gasped, and Patel's silence grew heavier than any confession. If the FBI's highest guardians can be sacrificed to politics, what truth is safe in America today? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Floodlights carve hard edges into the marble as the nation tunes in. A dozen boom mechs hover like intent birds over a horseshoe of polished wood, the camera red lights blinking in unison as producers count down from 5. Outside, lines of nurses, veterans, and shift workers clutch handmade signs that simply read truth, the sound of their chanting seeping under the heavy doors like a steady drum. Inside, a wide shot glides across the gallery, packed, breath held before settling on a stack of labeled binders and a single sealed evidence envelope stamped Exhibit R-7. Millions are watching the cost of a single lie. Jasmine Crockett sits forward first, not to speak but to claim the room, palms flat, chin level, gaze fixed on the witness table like a surveyor marking a fault line. Her reputation has arrived before her, fearless in hearings, precise with paper, and you can see the gallery lean a fraction, as if gravity shifted in her direction. Across from her, Kash Patel adjusts his tie twice, then a third time, a ritual of control that doesn't quite land. The envelope catches a glint of light. A yellow tab protrudes, handwritten. 47. A bailiff sets down a water pitcher and the ice crackles far too loud for such a large room. A junior staffer for the majority whispers, "Keep it tight," into a mic, and the phrase ripples along the days like a memo no one wants to own. Behind the witness chair, a second stack of binders arrives, gray, legal, unbranded, each spine strip marked with dates tied to investigations everyone in the building pretends not to recognize. The press round notes the color coding: red tabs for firings, blue for oaths, black for audio. A director's voice in a near-piece cues the split screen that will put Jasmine and Patel side by side for the country to compare without commentary. In the control room, a digital lower third is staged but not pushed. Restructuring or retaliation. A handheld camera drifts to a mother outside the glass who presses a palm to the window and mouths a name we don't hear. Then the shot flows back to the days where microphones gleam like small, patient questions. Jasmine inhales once, and it reads as a decision. Patel's counsel slides him a folded note. He doesn't open it. The chair's gavel hovers, and the low hum of air conditioning becomes, for an instant, the only sound in Washington. How much silence can a man endure when the truth presses in? Jasmine's binder opens to the first spread, dates left, names right, a neat column of case numbers underlined with the ink-straight confidence of someone who has rehearsed the order of revelation. She does not introduce herself. America already did that for her. She introduces the paper instead. Provenance, chain of custody, pagination of the complaint, 69 pages that will be cut into the bloodstream of the broadcast, one receipt at a time. The envelope sits between them like a held breath no one wants to exhale first. A floor producer flashes a cue card. Hold for audio. A veteran, in the gallery, jacket heavy with ribbons, straightens when Jasmine names the first date and closes his eyes when she pairs it with a termination timestamp. The camera does not linger, but the room feels it. Patel scratches at the corner of his nameplate as if the letters white lift. The mic picks up the faint rasp of metal on enamel. In a row of young reporters, someone types pattern and underlines it twice. The word will trend before the hour ends. On Jasmine's left, a small digital timer blinks idle at 0 o'clock, waiting for its moment like a cold spring in plain sight. The chair clears his throat. The benches tighten. The pins on every lapel go still. The first boom mic leans in until its foam cap nearly shadows the envelope flap. The gavel drops, a wooden pulse that ricochets off marble and lens glass and the thin skin of every screen in America. The camera finds Patel's jaw as it hardens once, then twice, and settles there, tight enough to show the flicker along the muscle where a word might have formed and didn't. The gavel's echo still hung in the chamber when Jasmine Crockett rose, binder in hand, her voice slicing through the silence like a blade drawn across glass. 69 pages, she announced, raising the lawsuit high enough for the cameras to capture the cover, each one carrying the wreckage of a career you tried to bury. The gallery leaned forward, microphone straining as her words hit like iron nails in wood. Kash Patel smirked, trying to soften the blow with a shake of his head. Restructuring, he countered, drawing out the word as if it could cover the cracks, as though it were nothing more than bureaucratic housekeeping. His hands made a small shrug, the gesture rehearsed, but his eyes blinked too often. Call it streamlining, not scandal. Jasmine didn't let him breathe. She turned a page, reading aloud names and dates. Voices of the unseen dragged into the light. Brian Driscoll, Christopher Meyer, Carol Leonig, Ken Delanian, each one on your chopping block. Each one silenced not for failure but for loyalty to truth. She slapped the binder shut and the sound cracked like thunder, drawing gasps from the rows behind her. That isn't restructuring, Mr. Patel, that's purging. Patel's jaw twitched. He leaned into the microphone, voice rising, trying to mask the tremor with bravado. You're nothing but a grandstanding clown, he spat, his fingers stabbing the air in her direction. Laughter uneasy, shock fluttered in the press row. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed, her reply precise as a scalpel. And you, sir, are a political hatchet man, the kind who mistakes destroying patriots for serving power. The words landed like a verdict, the chamber gasping as if the oxygen had been stolen from the air. The chair pounded the gavel, calling for order, but tension now had a pulse of its own. Patel shifted, knuckles white on the table, while Jasmine leaned back, calm as if she had expected this very explosion. She placed the lawsuit flat before her, fingertips resting lightly on the sealed envelope beside it. The camera catching the faint yellow tab that read 47, her voice dropped to a near whisper, but it carried across the hall, sharpened by the hush that fell again. You want to call this theater? Then let's show the nation the next act. She slid the envelope forward, tapping it once for emphasis. Because inside here is a recording of voice you will recognize, a confession you cannot escape. The gallery froze, phones lifted like torches. Patel's pupils flicked to the envelope, then away, his practiced smirk cracking for the briefest second. Outside the chamber, the crowd roared louder, though they could not yet know why. Jasmine let the silence build a moment longer, the kind of silence that swells until it feels heavier than words. Then delivered the line that detonated across every camera lens. This is not politics, Mr. Patel, this is proof. And once America hears it, nothing you say will matter again. The moment Jasmine's words about the recording struck the chamber, America split into 1,000 screens. CNN cut to an urgent banner. Fox scrambled with a breaking chyron. MSNBC replayed her glare frame by frame. On Twitter, the hashtag for 7 seconds shot into the global top 5 within minutes, followed closely by hashtag Crockett exposes Patel. TikTok feeds filled with slowed-down clips of Patel's tightening jaw, users timing his silence with digital counters, turning every second into a weapon. Instagram flooded with side-by-side memes. Jasmine, resolute and calm. Patel, blinking and cornered. The story wasn't just unfolding in the Capitol, it was detonating in every living room. Outside, the crowd swelled as word spread. Activists raised their fists in hope, their chants shaking the barricades, believing this could be the moment truth finally clawed its way past spin. Civil servants, watching from drab offices in D.C. and beyond, felt the cold edge of fear. If Patel's purge list was real, then their jobs, their lives, their families might have been only a line away from ruin. And deep inside MAGA circles, fury ignited. Loyalists crowded around car radios and live streams, shouting curses at Jasmine's name, convinced she was orchestrating a witch hunt. A man in a red cap tore his protest sign in half, screaming at the cameras, "They're trying to crucify him." While across the street, a veteran wept silently, his medals glinting under the sun as he whispered, "Finally, someone is fighting back." The cutaways kept coming. In Detroit, a black church held its Sunday service early and streamed Jasmine's confrontation on a projector, congregants clapping every time she struck Patel's excuses down. In a Dallas diner, truckers sat stiff, coffee mugs untouched, eyes glued to the TV, as the audio replayed Patel's stumble. And in a classroom in Atlanta, a teacher paused her lesson, letting her students watch, telling them, "This is history in real time." The hearing room itself seemed to shrink under the weight of the nation's eyes. Every raised eyebrow and swallowed breath magnified 1,000-fold by split screens and instant replays for those watching at home. It became clear, this was no longer about a lawsuit, nor a single man's denial. It was about the soul of a country, about whether power could smother truth or whether truth could burn through the silence. The questions forming in living rooms and phones across America weren't legal, they were moral. Was this democracy's reckoning, or its funeral rehearsal? Could silence itself now be considered a confession? The broadcast didn't just end on Jasmine's glare, it pressed into the minds of viewers like a brand, forcing them to confront a question no gavel could silence, no spin could erase. If justice is silenced here, who will speak for you tomorrow? Jasmine let the envelope linger in the silence, then slid a different folder onto the table, its cover stamped with the cold bureaucratic words "Internal Review." She flipped it open, and out spilled not rumors, but names, an entire list marked in bold red letters. Must go. The cameras zoomed in. The gallery craned their necks. America's breath caught as those names scrolled across screens. These weren't random staffers shuffled out in routine changes. These were agents tied to the most sensitive investigations of the last decade: Mueller's Russia probe, the January 6th assault, the classified files at Mar-a-Lago. Men and women who had carried secrets of state in their hands, suddenly erased with a stroke of someone's pen. Jasmine's voice sharpened into a blade as she read the details. Agent Morales dismissed without cause after 15 years, left with 2 children under 10 and a mortgage unpaid. Special Agent Ramirez forced out the week after testifying, his wife battling cancer, and the insurance vanished. A pilot, Christopher Meyer, decorated, loyal, gone in a single phone call. The chamber quaked with a kind of anger that was not political, but human. Patel leaned back, arms crossed, wearing the thin grin of a man who wanted to appear untouchable. When pressed, he shrugged, eyes sweeping the room as though daring anyone to challenge him. "Call it cleansing the rot," he said, the words delivered casually, like an inside joke tossed to his allies. The phrase struck like a hammer. The audience recoiled, gasps breaking out, the press row snapping to attention. Jasmine turned to him slowly, her glare more devastating than any outburst. Her hand fell flat against the list as though to protect it. "You call patriots rot?" she asked, her voice heavy, deliberate, every syllable echoing across the marble like a verdict. The silence afterward was suffocating. Even the cameras seemed to lean closer, waiting for Patel's smirk to falter. But the real blow wasn't Jasmine's voice, it was the human stories bleeding through the paper in front of her. Families dismantled overnight, children asking why their fathers were no longer allowed to serve, wives watching careers destroyed by politics masquerading as policy. In the back row, a woman clutched a photo of her husband in uniform, her knuckles pale, her lips trembling as Jasmine read another line aloud. The room wasn't hearing about procedure anymore. It was staring into the faces of lives crushed without warning. The tension snapped like a cable when a chair scraped loudly against the floor. From the witness row, a man in a plain suit, face weathered by years of service, rose slowly. The cameras locked on him, the gallery surged forward, and every whisper died in an instant. Brian Driscoll, once a name buried in internal memos, now figure stepping into the light, stood tall, steady, and unflinching. The chamber seemed to tilt as he cleared his throat, ready to speak truth against the man who had marked him for erasure. And in that heartbeat of silence before his words, America realized this was no longer testimony. This was rebellion in real time. Brian Driscoll stood with the slow dignity of a man who had carried too much weight for too long. His hands trembled only once as he adjusted the microphone, then stilled. The gallery leaned forward as though he carried not just his own voice, but the burden of every silenced name on Jasmine's list. "I was ordered," he began, each word deliberate, to draw up termination papers on colleagues whose only crime was following the law. "I was told to sign off on false reports, to rewrite evaluations that were spotless into reasons for dismissal." His jaw tightened, his eyes scanning the chamber, then dropping to the floor as though he could still see the faces of those betrayed. "I refused. And the next day, my badge was taken, my pension stripped, my 20 years gone." A low murmur rippled through the gallery, admiration laced with grief. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens struggling to keep pace with the electricity in the room. A veteran in the back row nodded solemnly, as if to salute a comrade fallen in a different kind of battle. For a moment, there was a rare silence filled not with fear but with reverence. The chamber could feel the weight of sacrifice, the nobility of a man who chose principle over survival. But Kash Patel couldn't leave it unbroken. He slammed his palm on the table, cutting into the testimony like an intruder into prayer. "You're nothing but a coward hiding behind paper," he barked, his voice rising, desperate to claw back control. "You disobeyed direct orders, you undermined the chain of command, and now you want to cry victim because your career ended." His words dripped with venom, yet the tremor in his hand betrayed him. The mask slipping, the audience gasped, But Jasmine was already on her feet. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her voice cut cleaner than Patel's roar. "Better a coward than a criminal," she fired back, the line landing like a thunderclap. The room erupted, cheers from activists, shouts of outrage from Patel's loyalists, the gavel hammering in vain. The contrast was stark. Patel, red-faced and raging. Jasmine, steady and surgical, defending a man who had given up everything to keep his conscience intact. Driscoll didn't flinch at the insult. Instead, he leaned closer to the mic, his voice low but piercing enough to slice through the nose. "You called me a coward," he said. Eyes locked on Patel. "But I remember your words the day you gave me that order. I remember because they still burn in my head. You looked me in the eye and said." His pause was surgical, stretching long enough for the nation to inhale as one. "My job depends on it." The chamber froze. The press row jolted as if struck by lightning. Pens scratching, cameras zooming, feeds exploding. The words didn't just expose Patel's desperation, they framed him as a man willing to sacrifice patriots to save himself. And in that charged silence, the audience felt it. Driscoll's stand wasn't just testimony. It was a blade twisted straight into Patel's armor. A revelation that promised the next blow would be fatal to his defense. The chamber door opened and Christopher Myers stepped forward, his posture unmistakable, straight-backed. Every inch the soldier he had been trained to be. The ribbons on his chest were muted under the artificial light, but the weight they carried was unmistakable. When he spoke, his voice carried the low timbre of someone who had flown through storms and enemy fire, only to be shot down by politics. "I was dismissed," he said, each word deliberate, "because of a rumor. A lie whispered in the corridors of power that I was not loyal enough, that I leaned against their movement. A rumor that spread while I was flying Patel's plane, ferrying him across states, carrying him safely while they plotted my removal behind my back." The crowd erupted in a wave of gasps. A pilot, trusted with the life of the very man who orchestrated the purge, discarded like spare equipment. Reporters scrambled, fingers hammering keys, trying to capture the weight of the revelation before the moment slipped away. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. She knew the story was bigger than betrayal. It was a mirror held up to the nation's sickness. She rose, her voice booming not only for the chamber but for every camera lens transmitting live. "A soldier decorated for service, a man trusted with lives, smeared and discarded not because of failure but because of politics. That is not restructuring. That is treason against loyalty itself." The activists in the gallery rose to their feet, clapping furiously until the gavel banged like a drumbeat of panic. Myers' jaw quivered once, but his eyes never broke. He wasn't a victim begging for sympathy, he was a soldier delivering a final report, and the nation was forced to read it aloud with him. Patel leaned forward, the sneer returning like a mask slipping over fear. "Collateral damage in politics," he muttered, dismissive, as though Myers' years of sacrifice were a line item in a budget report. The room hissed, a sound like steam rising from stone. Jasmine turned sharply, her fingers stabbing the air toward Patel, her voice cutting through the uproar. "You don't call soldiers collateral. You call them heroes. And when you break them for convenience, you break the covenant of this nation." Her words struck like artillery, and even the cameras seemed to shake as they closed in on Patel's face. The smirk fading, the sweat gathering. Myers' voice rose one last time, trembling now not with weakness, but with fury kept too long inside. "I gave my life to this flag, and when it was my turn to be protected, I was abandoned." The silence that followed was heavier than any chant outside, a silence that made every viewer at home feel complicit if they did nothing. And then Jasmine drove it home, her tone steady as iron, her gaze fixed on the audience beyond the walls. "What would you do if loyalty to your country cost you your career?" The question didn't echo in the chamber, it echoed in living rooms, in offices, in classrooms, leaving viewers to wrestle with whether silence was safety or the first step toward betrayal. The binder lay open like a wound on the table, its pages bristling with highlighted lines and dates. Jasmine Crockett adjusted the microphone, her voice low but sharp enough to slice the chamber in two. She read slowly, each word heavy, deliberate, impossible to mishear. "My job depends on it." The gallery stilled, the cameras tilted forward, the moment pulled taut like a wire ready to snap. She lifted her eyes, fixed on Patel, and asked the question that turned the room into a furnace. "Did you say this?" Patel blinked, his lips parting as though words might tumble out, but none did. Silence descended, dense and suffocating. The clock on the wall ticked once, then again. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. The camera zoomed in, lenses tightening on his face, catching the subtle twitch along his jaw, the bead of sweat forming at his temple. Somewhere in the gallery, a voice began counting under its breath. 1, 2, 3. By the time it reached 10, the entire room was whispering the numbers, a macabre chorus carried by a nation watching live. Hashtags flared like sparks across social media. Hash for 7 seconds. At 15 seconds, Patel shifted in his chair, his fingers tapping the table in a jittery rhythm. He looked at his attorney, then away, his mouth tightening, but still no answer came. The whispering count swelled louder, each number stabbing at the silence like a drumbeat of judgment. 20 seconds, 30. Reporters' hands trembled as they typed, already writing the headline. The silence heard around America. Jasmine didn't move. She stood perfectly still, her gaze unblinking, letting the weight of his refusal speak louder than any argument she could craft. At 40 seconds, the whispers turned into an audible chant, the sound spilling out of the chamber, picked up by the microphones and broadcast into homes across the country. 41, 42, 43. The tension wasn't just in the room. It was in living rooms, in subway cars, in bars where strangers stopped mid-sentence to count along with the fee. America itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a man cornered by his own words to find an escape that wasn't there. At 47 seconds, the silence shattered. Patel's chest rose sharply, his face twisting with frustration, and he finally forced words past his lips. Out of context, he stammered, the phrase breaking like glass on the marble floor. The gallery erupted, gasps, shouts, the gavel pounding desperately for order. But the damage was already done, for those watching. It wasn't his denial that mattered, it was the silence before it. The frozen stretch of 47 seconds, where a man accused could not summon the courage to defend himself. And as his weak protest echoed, Jasmine leaned closer, her voice steady as steel. Context doesn't take 47 seconds. Mr. Patel, truth doesn't need silence to breathe. The chamber fell into a roar, and the cliffhanger loomed. If this was just the beginning, what would happen when the recording itself was played? Patel's voice cracked as he lunged for control, slamming his palms against the table. "You're nothing but a partisan witch hunter," he barked, the words spitting across the mic and bouncing against the marble walls. The insult hung heavy, intended to wound. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned in, her tone low, cutting, designed to pierce deeper than any shot. "Deader a witch hunter than the devil's errand bow." The line detonated through the chamber like a bomb, reporters' fingers flying, the crowd roaring in gasps and scattered applause. Patel's face flushed crimson, his composure slipping like a mask in a storm. He tried to claw his way back, his insults now scattershot, meant to rattle. "You're loud, Congresswoman. You mistake nose for substance." His voice shook, but the volume rose, desperation leaking through. Jasmine's lips curled into something between a smile and a strike. She straightened, pointing directly at him, her words sharp enough to slice through the chaos. "And you, Mr. Patel, are the janitor of corruption sweeping away the filth, not to clean this country, but to hide it under the rug." The phrase cut through the chamber like shrapnel. The gallery erupted, half cheering, half jeering, a theater of democracy turned gladiatorial arena. The gavel pounded uselessly, drowned beneath the swirl of boos, applause, and chants. Cameras zoomed tight on Patel's face, catching the twitch of his jaw, the anger in his eyes. On Jasmine, the lens lingered longer, calm, precise, her stare unwavering as though daring him to try again. It wasn't just an exchange of words. It was a battle of identities as rooted in evasion and rage, hers in clarity and defiance. Patel's allies muttered behind him, one leaning close with frantic whispers, but he swatted the advice away. He pointed across the dais, trying to paint Jasmine as a fraud. "You're playing to cameras, not to justice. This is theater, and you're the actress." The accusation might have landed if not for the very theater they were all trapped in, a stage lit by the truth Patel couldn't shake. Jasmine seized the irony, her reply swift and merciless. "If this is theater, then America's watching the villain forget his lines." The chamber split again, cheers clashing with jeers, journalists shouting into phones, hashtags exploding online. The room felt like it was about to combust, democracy itself stretching at the seams under the weight of revelation and rage. Jasmine let the nose peak, then raised her hand. The room hushed, not by command but by anticipation, the sense that something larger was coming. She tapped the binder once, then turned toward the witness bench. Her voice steadied, precise, a drumbeat signaling the next strike. "Enough of Patel's denials. Let's hear from the one man who can confirm his words. The cameras pivoted instantly, focusing on the witness rising slowly, his expression grim, the truth etched deep into his face. Patel's smirk collapsed into silence, and in that frozen second before testimony began, American knew this wasn't just insult and spectacle anymore. This was about to become evidence. And evidence could bury a man alive. The chamber shifted from fire to silence as Carol Leonig took her place, a folder clutched in her hands, not thick with evidence but thin with human stories. She opened it carefully, as though each page carried the weight of someone's life. Her voice wasn't thunderous like Jasmine's. It was steady, haunting, the tone of a journalist who had stared too long into wounds that never healed. Agent Morales, she began, was escorted out of his office with 2 boxes and a security guard. His daughter was in the hospital the same day, fighting pneumonia. Without his job, her treatments fell into uncertainty. The gallery exhaled sharply, a single sound that felt like grief. Carol turned another page. Special Agent Ramirez dismissed 2 months before his wife's second round of chemotherapy. She told me she begged him not to lose hope, even as their health insurance disappeared. The room stirred, eyes turning downward, as though no one wanted to meet the mirror of that cruelty. She kept going. One agent found out he'd been fired not from his supervisor, but from a news ticker running across the bottom of a television screen. His children were watching cartoons, when the headline flashed, FBI shakeup, names revealed. That was how his family learned. Her words were blades wrapped in sorrow, cutting not with rage but with raw empathy. The audience no longer cheered or jeered. They sat hushed, absorbing the devastation behind the statistics. What was once abstract now had faces of children, spouses, parents left to pay the price of politics. Jasmine leaned in, her hand resting gently on the folder as if to anchor it to the table. Her voice carried the sorrow into something larger, sharper, tethering it to the very communities who bore the brunt of silence. When power silences truth, minorities suffer first, she said, her tone deliberate, rising from grief into indictment. The agents dismissed were not just names, they were protectors of law, of democracy. And when they were silenced, who stood in their place? Who shielded the vulnerable from the acts that followed? She gestured toward the gallery, to the veterans, the mothers, the workers outside. The same silence that destroyed their careers stalks every community that dares to speak truth against power. This is not just about the FBI, it's about every citizen who has ever been told to sit down, shut up, and take it. The audience sat frozen, the weight of her words pressing deeper than any insult or legal argument could. A man in uniform brushed hairs from his face. A young woman clutched her phone, recording every syllable, whispering, "People need to hear this." Across the country, millions of viewers leaned closer to their screens, realizing this wasn't just spectacle, it was a reckoning dressed in testimony. And then Jasmine delivered the question that struck harder than any piece of evidence, her voice steady but loaded with gravity. Who protects the protectors when politics wields the axe? The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was filled with reflection. The uncomfortable awareness that the answer didn't lie in Patel's defense, but in the choices every citizen would make when their turn came to stand. Brian Driscoll's voice carried the steadiness of a man who had held this truth inside for too long, and the chamber seemed to bend toward him as he spoke. It wasn't just Patel, he began, his eyes sweeping the days. It came from higher. I was summoned to a conference room at DOJ, blinds drawn, 3 officials seated across the table. They didn't mince words. They told me, we need symmetry. If their side loses people, ours must lose people too. I asked for clarity, and one of them leaned in, lowered his voice, and said it plain. Give me names. I want blood. The gallery gasped, a sound riot collective, as though the entire room had been struck. Patel sat rigid, lips pressed into a thin line, the vein in his temple visible but his voice absent. The silence from him only amplified the horror of Driscoll's words. Reporters in the front row glanced at one another, scribbling furiously, knowing they had just heard the kind of phrase that would headline every front page in the morning. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, her fingers curling into a fist against the binder until the paper crinkled beneath her touch. She rose in one swift motion, her palm slamming down against the wood with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. They wanted scouts, she thundered, her eyes burning through Patel. And you handed them lives. The crowd erupted outrage, applause, shouts colliding in chaos. The gavel pounded, but no one cared. The sound was drowned by the rising tide of voices demanding accountability. Patel tried to hold his composure, but the camera caught his eyes darting left, then right, searching for escape as the storm closed in. His silence was louder than any denial. It was the silence of complicity, the silence of a man caught between orders he obeyed and a truth he could no longer outrun. Jasmine leaned over the mic, her voice lower now, controlled, but every word edged with steel. This wasn't some office reshuffling. This was political bloodletting, ordered from above, executed by men who swore to protect the law. And now the American people know it, but they don't know all of it. She let the words hang, her pause deliberate, forcing the cameras to zoom closer, the gallery to lean in, the nation to hold its breath. Then, with a slow, devastating precision, she pointed to the sealed folder at her side. Because I have evidence, direct evidence that this pressure came from the White House itself. The room froze. Patel's mask shattered, his face paling, his hand twitching toward the folder as if he could somehow stop what was coming. The gallery gasped again, louder, and the nose spilled into a roar that shook the chamber like a living thing. Reporters shot out of their seats, phones raised, voices clashing as they scrambled to transmit the revelation. And as the chaos swelled, Jasmine remained standing, unshaken, her eyes locked on Patel as though already delivering the verdict. The cliffhanger pressed down like thunderclouds ready to split open. If the next folder held what she promised, the storm would not just engulf Patel, it would reach the Oval Office itself. Patel snapped, his voice ricocheting off the marble like a ricocheted bullet. "You think you're righteous?" he roared, his fist slamming against the table, veins straining at his neck. "You're nothing but a circus act, a performer feeding a mob." His words dripped with venom, but his eyes betrayed panic, darting to the cameras that were no longer his allies, but his executioners. The chamber trembled with the force of his rage, a man cornered and clawing for an exit. Jasmine didn't blink. She rose slowly, as if the weight of the room bent toward her, her voice calm, measured, lethal. "No, Mr. Patel," she said, every syllable slicing through the nose. "I am not a circus act. I am the voice your victims never had." The words cracked open the chamber like lightning, cheers erupting from one side of the gallery, jeers from the other. The air alive with division, the back and forth became a duel, each line a punch, each pause a breathless count. In a boxing match the whole nation was scoring. Patel leaned forward, snarling, his voice breaking into fragments. "You twist facts, you weaponize grief, you don't care about justice, you care about headlines." Jasmine stepped closer to the mic, her stare pinning him down like a predator on its prey. Headlines didn't strip those agents of their badges. Headlines didn't fire a decorated pilot while he flew your plane. Headlines didn't sign purge lists in back rooms. Her words hit like body blows, relentless, each one leaving Patel visibly shaken. The crowd shouted over itself, half calling Jasmine a savior, half calling her a witch, but the truth was undeniable. Patel's composure was unraveling thread by thread. Then, as the storm reached its peak, the rhythm shifted. An eerie calm slipped over the chamber, as if the room itself paused to inhale. The gallery quieted, waiting. Patel slumped back in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests so tightly the leather creaked, his eyes bloodshot, his breathing shallow. Jasmine, still standing, allowed the silence to harden, making every viewer at home lean closer, drawn in by the absence of sound. It was in that stillness that Ken Delanian rose from the press route, holding a transcript high for the cameras. His voice cut like a scalpel. "Mr. Patel, under oath in the Senate, you swore politics would never interfere with FBI personnel decisions." Word for word. "Politics has no place in bureau staffing." He lowered the page slowly, eyes narrowing. "Yet here, under oath again, we've heard testimony, documents, and even your own silence proving the opposite." The chamber detonated in uproar, gasps, shouts, reporters racing to file breaking updates. Patel's face drained of color, his mouth opening but no defense forming. He looked cornered, stripped bare by his own contradictions, exposed as a man who had sworn purity while orchestrating corruption. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't need to. She leaned into the mic, her voice a quiet dagger. "You lied not once, but twice to Congress, to America, and to yourself. And every second you sit there, that leak corrodes what's left of your oath." The crowd roared again, but beneath the chaos, the cliffhanger loomed heavy. If Patel's own sworn words had turned against him, what would happen when the White House evidence finally landed on the table? The screens flickered to life above the chamber, and a clip rolled, grainy but undeniable. Kash Patel seated before the Senate, hand raised, voice steady, swearing before God and country. "Politics has no place in bureau staffing. I will never allow partisan interests to dictate personnel decisions." His tone was calm then, rehearsed, almost sanctimonious. The clip ended with his oath frozen on the screen, the seal of the Senate behind him like a halo of false virtue. The room was silent for a heartbeat, until Jasmine signaled with a nod, and a second reel began, testimony after testimony stitched together into a montage of betrayal. Brian Driscoll recounting illegal orders. Christopher Myers' voice breaking as he said he was fired mid-flight. Carol Leonig reading stories of families broken by sudden dismissals. The juxtaposition was surgical, the two images colliding until they burned themselves into the minds of everyone watching. The audience felt the hypocrisy in their bones. Senators in the back shifted uncomfortably, avoiding the cameras, while the gallery erupted in whispers sharp enough to pierce marble. Reporters hammered at their keyboards, knowing they had the lead story of the decade. Patel sat motionless, but the tremor in his jaw betrayed him, his hand fidgeting with the edge of his tie like a man trying to hold onto a rope fraying in his palms. Jasmine let the footage replay once more, freezing on Patel's raised hand, the oath that now looked like a mockery. She stepped forward, her voice not raised, but sharpened to a blade. "You didn't just lie to me," she said, each word deliberate, echoing through the chamber. "You lied to America." The words detonated, drawing gasps and shouts, half the room exploding in applause while the other half drowned in jeers. Patel leaned toward his mic, opening his mouth as though to defend himself, but nothing came. His silence was damning, heavier than any denial. The tension swelled again, a sine wave cresting, and Jasmine pressed harder, pacing the rhythm like a conductor guiding the storm. Every badge taken, every career destroyed, every family stripped of its livelihood, all of it traces back to your oath broken under the flag you swore to honor. And now the people see you not as a servant of justice, but as its saboteur. The crowd erupted again, but the rhythm shifted, dipping into eerie calm as Jasmine let her words hang. The silence became a mirror, reflecting not only Patel's betrayal, but the nation's complicity in letting men like him operate in the shadows. She turned slightly, not to Patel, but to the cameras, her gaze reaching through the lens into living rooms across the country. When lies are spoken under oath, is silence complicity? The question didn't just fill the chamber, it spilled into the bloodstream of the nation, a challenge branded into every viewer's conscience. And as the gavel pounded for order, the emotion surged once more, because America knew that silence now would not just protect Patel, it would define them. Carol Leonig rose with a small black device in her hand, its blinking light drawing every eye in the chamber. "What you're about to hear," she said, her voice steady, "is Kash Patel in his own words, recorded during a closed-door meeting." The room shifted, bodies leaning forward, breaths suspended as she pressed play. A hiss of static filled the speakers, then Patel's unmistakable voice cut through. Low, hurried, almost conspiratorial. "Look, I had to fire them. My job depends on it. If I don't deliver, I'm gone." The words seemed to hang in the air long after they ended. For a moment, the chamber was not a room but a held breath, every heartbeat magnified. Reporters bent forward in unison, pens scraping paper with frantic strokes, while photographers snapped shots of Patel's paling face. The gallery gasped, some covering their mouths, others rising halfway from their seats as though unable to contain the shock. Jasmine didn't move, her stillness only sharpened the spectacle, her eyes locked on Patel, watching the man unravel under the weight of his own confession. Patel's complexion drained to chalk, his jaw slackening as the words replayed, echoing off marble and through the microphones. He looked down as if the table itself might swallow him, then shot a glance at his attorney, who offered nothing but silence. The montage of testimonies, the juxtaposition with his oath, now fused perfectly with this recording, his voice the missing link, the nail in the coffin. Jasmine finally spoke, quiet but devastating. "Not my words. Not speculation. Your words. Your truth." Stripped of spin, the crowd erupted again. A tidal wave of shouts, cheers, boos, chaos bleeding through the chamber walls into the streets outside. The gavel pounded furiously, but order was gone, replaced by the roar of a nation hearing what it was never meant to hear. Patel's hands trembled, his chest heaved, and then he snapped, his voice exploding through the mic. "It's fake," he screamed, the denial more desperate than convincing, his eyes wild as if searching for a lifeline that no longer existed. The reporters looked up sharply, some already shaking their heads, others whispering to each other that the outburst itself was proof of collapse. Jasmine didn't flinch, didn't blink, she simply let the silence after his shout engulf him like a tie. The cliffhanger tightened, the whole chamber bracing for the next blow. If this was the first recording, what else was waiting to surface? Patel's outburst echoed against the marble like a cracking glass, And when the sound faded, he was left gasping, his chest rising and falling too fast. His voice cracked as he pointed a trembling finger at Jasmine. "You planted it. You doctored it. This whole circus is a setup to destroy me." His words tumbled out in fragments, each less convincing than the last, his fury tangled with panic, desperation leaking into every syllable. Cameras zoomed in mercilessly, catching the sweat glistening on his forehead, the frantic dart of his eyes, as though he might still find an escape route in the unyielding air of the chamber. Jasmine didn't rise to his volume. She leaned closer to the microphone, her tone calm, deliberate, the blade to his flailing fists. "This isn't fake," she said, her gaze steady, her voice amplified across the chamber. "This is your echo, the sound of your own truth chasing you, louder than your denials, louder than your lies." The gallery erupted, cheers clashing with boos, voices merging into a fever pitch that no gavel could tame. A chant began in the back row, quiet at first, then swelling into a thunderous chorus. "Resign, resign, resign." The word pounded in rhythm with fists on benches, shaking the chamber as though the building itself had joined in the demand. Patel tried to shout over it, his arms raised in defiance, but the chant swallowed him whole. His words dissolved into the noise, drowned out by a crowd that no longer saw him as a witness, but as the accused. The emotional wave hit its peak, cameras catching the moment from every angle, hashtags erupting online, the chant spilling into the streets, where thousands outside took it up in unison. The room pulsed with rage, hope, demand until suddenly, the wave receded. Patel's voice broke again, this time into silence, his body slumping into his chair. His shoulders sagged, his head bowed, his hands limp against the table. The defeated posture of a man realizing not just that the crowd had turned, but that history itself had already written its verdict. The quiet that followed was not mercy. It was a requiem. Reporters lowered their pens, sensing they were no longer covering testimony, but witnessing a collapse in real time. Jasmine didn't move for a long moment, letting the image of Patel's slump sear itself into the nation's consciousness. Then she spoke, her voice lower now, resonant, carrying the weight of a question meant not just for Patel but for every American watching. "How many lies does it take before power collapses?" The silence that followed was total, the kind that forces reflection, the kind that makes even the loudest ears hear their own hearts beating in fear. The chamber's roar had barely faded before America's screens exploded in light. Phones buzzed, televisions blared, laptops refreshed as hashtags ignited like wildfire. Hash for 7 seconds surged back to the top, now joined by hashtag Crockett exposes Patel, hashtag echo of truth, and the most brutal of all, hashtag Patel silent. Cable news anchors spoke over one another, voices layered with urgency, replaying the clip of Patel's 47 seconds of silence in endless loops. On one split screen, commentators debated whether it was a tactical pause. On another, body language experts slowed down every blink, every twitch of his jaw, calling it the portrait of guilt caught in real time. The montage unfolded at breakneck speed. TikTok teens created edits with countdown timers ticking across Patel's frozen face, spliced with Jasmine's dagger-sharp retort. "This isn't fake. This is your echo." Veterans filmed themselves in uniforms, some saluting their screens as Jasmine's words played, others staring into cameras with tears glinting in their eyes, declaring, "This is the leadership we swore to protect." Minority leaders live-streamed from church basements and community halls, repeating Jasmine's line about silence striking marginalized voices first. Their streams gathering thousands, then millions. The cultural split sharpened. Patel's allies tried to mount a defense, tweeting frantically about media spin and deepfakes, but their words were drowned beneath an avalanche of clips, memes, and chants digitized and amplified across platforms. One meme went viral within minutes. Patel slumped in his chair, eyes down, overlaid with the caption, "Error 47, truth not found." Jasmine, meanwhile, was transformed into an icon. Her image, finger-pointed, eyes blazing, was plastered across protest posters, profile pictures, even graffiti sprayed onto brick walls in downtown streets overnight. She wasn't just a congresswoman anymore. She had become a folk hero, a vessel of defiance carried by the rhythm of a country that had been waiting for someone to speak the words they themselves couldn't. The emotional rhythm swelled again, cresting as networks aired montages of rallies across the nation. Crowds in New York chanted her name in unison. In Texas, truckers parked their rigs in a convoy, horns blaring. In California, college campuses turned into open-air screenings of Patel's silence on massive projectors. Then, The wave dipped, as pundits raised a sobering question: could the sheer volume of no's drown out the meaning? Could truth, even when shouted by millions, survive the storm of disinformation already brewing from Patel's defenders? And yet, through the no's, Jasmine's words carried. Repeated in living rooms, scrawled on placards, embedded in trending audio, "This is your echo." Truth had outrun spin, traveling faster than denial could organize, embedding itself into the culture like a rhythm too loud to ignore. The camera pulled back from the montage, fading into a single line written across the screen, stark and unflinching: "Will justice ride the wave, or drown in the noise?" The noise that began in the chamber spilled into the streets like a flood no barricade could contain. Across New York, voices thundered through the canyon of skyscrapers: "Crockett! Crockett!" Their chants echoing off glass and steel as thousands marched with homemade signs scrawled with hashtag for 7 seconds. In Los Angeles, immigrant families carried American flags alongside photos of agents fired without cause. Children riding on shoulders holding placards that read, "Truth has no party." In Atlanta, Black churches opened their doors not for worship but for rallies. Choirs singing freedom songs laced with Jasmine's words, their voices shaking stained glass as congregants lifted fists skyward. The montage swept the nation. Veterans in full dress uniforms stood in silence at state capitals, medals gleaming under gray skies, each one holding a cardboard sign: "We serve." She speaks. Outside the White House gates, college students projected Patel's 47-second silence onto the walls, the countdown timer flashing in neon red. Each second cheered like a fireworks display. In Chicago, mothers marched with strollers, chanting, "Not collateral, not silence, justice." The sound rolled like thunder across America, the rhythm of a country no longer watching but moving. Yet the wave was not without fracture. Patel's supporters gathered too, red caps bobbing through the crowd, their shouts of witch hunt clashing against chants of resign. Clashes broke out in city squares, fists raised, banners torn, the police caught between fury and faith. On live broadcasts, anchors' voices rose as they described an America divided against itself, one half rallying behind a woman who demanded truth, the other shielding a man crumbling beneath it. In Dallas, two rallies met on the same street, lines of citizens facing each other as if the nation itself had split down a single line of pavement. The emotion peaked, chaos swelling, until the footage shifted back to Washington, where the Capitol loomed against the evening sky. Inside, the chamber prepared for Jasmine's return, the air heavy with anticipation. Reporters whispered that her next words would be the closing argument of a lifetime, a speech that might not only end Patel's defense but redraw the moral lines of the nation. Outside, chants of her name rattled the windows, unrelenting, a chorus demanding resolution. And in that pause before the storm, as cameras panned across her papers neatly stacked, the microphone adjusted, and her silhouette waiting in stillness. The cliffhanger tightened like a held breath. Jasmine Crockett, the woman who had turned silence into confession and outrage into movement, was about to deliver her final statement. The question was no longer whether America would hear her, it was whether they were ready for what she was about to say. Jasmine rose slowly, the chamber lights catching the sharp lines of her face, the weight of a nation pressing into her shoulders. She placed both hands on the table, looked out over the gallery, and let her first word slice through the chaos like a blade. "Justice isn't partisan, it's patriotic." The chant outside went silent for a heartbeat, as if the entire country leaned closer to listen. Her voice climbed, weaving history into the present. She invoked the marchers of Selma, the immigrants who carried hope across oceans, the soldiers who swore oaths not to party or president but to the Constitution itself. Each name, each struggle layered like bricks in the foundation of her argument, building a wall against the tide of Patel's excuses. The rhythm shifted, anger giving way to empathy. Every badge stripped, every job stolen, every family left to fend for themselves. That pain is not abstract. It is real, and it is shared by every American who has ever felt abandoned by the system meant to protect them. Her tone softened, pulling the gallery into her orbit, voices falling still as she extended the wound beyond agents and into living rooms. Then her words rose again, sharper, her cadence pounding like a drumbeat. The Constitution does not bend to fear. It does not answer to whispers in back rooms. It answers to the people, and I will not let those voices be silenced. The chamber erupted in applause, chants rising again, the emotion cresting like a wave. Patel couldn't stand it. He lurched forward, his voice shrill and cracking. "Drama queen!" he shouted, his fist slamming against the table. the insult hung in the air. Desperate and thin, Jasmine didn't falter. She pivoted, her stare cutting him in half. Deader queen than coward, she fired back, her voice steady, her words cheered like a victory bell. The gallery roared, half in triumph, half in outrage, the gavel pounding like a heartbeat out of sync. Kash Patel's face flushed, twisted. Cornered, and the nation saw not a fighter, but a man unraveling in real time. The rhythm dipped again, eerie calm filling the space as Jasmine straightened her papers and pressed on as if his outburst were nothing more than static. But Patel couldn't take it. He pushed his chair back violently, the scrape shrieking across the marble. His microphone toppled sideways as he stood, pointing a shaking finger at Jasmine. "This is a sham," he shouted, his words breaking, his body trembling with rage. And then on live television, before millions, he stormed out of the chamber, flanked by aides who scrambled after him, the cameras chasing until the heavy door slammed shut. The room erupted in chaos, cheers and jeers colliding, reporters yelling into phones, hashtags exploding with every second of his walkout. Jasmine didn't smile. She let the storm rage around her, standing calm at the center, her voice ready for the final strike. The cliffhanger burned itself into every screen. After Patel's collapse, what truth would Jasmine unleash in her closing words? The chamber door still quivered from Patel's furious exit when the sound of muffled sobs broke through the chaos. In the front row, the wife of a dismissed agent pressed her hands to her face, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. Beside her, a teenage boy in an oversized jacket clutched his father's old FBI badge, his knuckles white, his eyes red. Jasmine stepped down from the dais, breaking protocol, and crossed the floor. Cameras followed her every movement as she knelt beside the bow, resting her hand over his, steadying the trembling badge between them. "Your father's service is not forgotten," she whispered, and the boy nodded, tears spilling as the gallery erupted in a ripple of emotion. The montage bled outward into America. In Detroit, an immigrant family crowded around their television, their matriarch wiping tears as she repeated Jasmine's words aloud in Spanish, her children echoing them back. In a small-town diner in Ohio, veterans raised their coffee mugs in silence, one of them whispering, "She's fighting for us." In Atlanta, a choir stood in the middle of a church hall, voices rising not in him, but in Jasmine's line. Justice isn't partisan, it's patriotic, their harmonies shaking the rafters. The wave of grief bent into something else, solidarity, fragile but fierce, born of shared wounds and rising hope. Back inside the chamber, Jasmine returned to her seat, her eyes sweeping over the family's, wives clutching photos, husbands holding children, parents carrying the weight of loss. The emotion dipped into empathy, the kind that tightened throats and dampened eyes even through screens. But then it rose again, cresting into something stronger as the families stood, one by one, to applaud her, their tears no longer of despair but of defiance. Reporters captured the moment, headlines already writing themselves, from silence to solidarity. Jasmine turned to the cameras, her voice calm but edged with steel, the weight of the night condensed into one question meant to pierce the nation's conscience. "If justice is fragile," she asked, her gaze steady, "will you be the ones to guard it?" The chamber fell still, but across the country hearts pounded, because the answer was no longer hers to give, it belonged to the people. The storm Patel tried to outrun came crashing down the moment he stormed out of the chamber. Legal analysts on every network declared that his silence and contradictions opened the door to perjury charges, and within hours whispers of indictments rippled through Washington. Lawsuits stacked higher than the folders on Jasmine's desk, each one naming Patel, each one dragging him deeper into the quicksand of accountability. His allies shouted about witch hunts, but the words rang hollow as clips of his 47 seconds of silence replayed on endless loops. Meanwhile, Jasmine's image surged beyond the hearing room. To her critics, she became a lightning rod, attacked as ruthless, theatrical, dangerous. But to millions, she was a defender of truth, her base swelling as ordinary citizens who had never spoken of politics before began sharing her words. Her face appeared on murals in Detroit, her quotes printed on protest placards in Phoenix, her voice sampled in viral videos that young activists played through megaphones at rallies. She was no longer just a congresswoman, she was becoming the embodiment of resistance to silence itself. America split in debate, the country tearing at its seams. Was Patel a victim of partisan vengeance, or a traitor who sacrificed justice for power? Was Jasmine a hero wielding accountability like a sword, or a radical dragging politics into dangerous theater? On every screen, in every diner, in every church basement, the arguments rage. Loyalty versus justice, truth versus power. Yet the numbers told their own story, her approval climbing, his collapsing, the tide shifting in real time. And then came the cliffhanger no network could soften. A federal verdict still pending. One that would not just decide Patel's fate, but could reshape the FBI itself. The nation waited, breath held, knowing the next gavel could redraw the line between politics and justice forever. Jasmine stood one last time. The chamber hushed as though the very walls leaned in to catch her words. Her voice was lower now, no longer sharpened to strike but softened to carry the weight of everything the hearing had unearthed. Justice, she began, is not an abstract idea debated in halls like this. It is lived in every family betrayed when politics trades truth for power. It is in the mother who lost her husband's tension overnight, in the child who watched their parent branded disloyal for serving honorably. The gallery stirred, some nodding, some weeping quietly, every word settling heavy in the air. She let the rhythm dip into sorrow, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the silenced families, then rose again into hope. I have seen resilience in those who lost everything and still found the courage to speak. I have seen strength in veterans abandoned by the very nation they protected, yet still saluting its flag. I have seen voices deemed expendable refuse to vanish. Her tone grew firmer, more insistent, building a swell that felt less like a speech and more like a call carved into history. Then came the peak, her voice breaking into something luminous, her hand resting on the binder of ruined careers. To the marginalized, to the silenced, to every person who has been told your pain does not matter, I am here to say it does. Your truth matters. The chamber erupted, applause rolling like thunder, cheers rising from the crowd outside. Her words carried on chants that refused to die. And as the storm ebbed into silence, Jasmine turned to the cameras, her eyes locking with the millions watching. Will you stand silent? She asked, her voice ringing with finality. Or will you stand with justice? The question hung in the air like a verdict still waiting to be written. Its answer left not to her but to the people. The double doors of the Capitol swung open, and Jasmine stepped into the night. The air was electric, the chants from the crowd rolling like waves crashing against stone. She descended the marble steps slowly, each footfall deliberate, as though carrying not just her own weight but the burden of every silenced voice she had spoken for. Floodlights bathed her in a stark glow, cameras flashing like lightning, as the line of citizens waiting for her surged forward. Nurses still in scrubs, janitors with work-worn hands, veterans in faded uniforms, they pressed against the barricades, reaching not for spectacle but for connection. A nurse broke through first, tears streaking her cheeks as she clasped Jasmine's hand and whispered, "For my brother." "Thank you." A janitor lifted his daughter onto his shoulders so she could wave a handwritten sign. "Your truth matters." A veteran, medals gleaming against his chest, saluted with a trembling hand, his eyes brimming with unspoken gratitude. The montage unfolded in flashes, faces proud, faces tearful, faces defiant, ordinary Americans transformed into witnesses of history. Their presence louder than any verdict yet to come. The crowd's roar swelled, then dipped into a solemn hush as Jasmine paused midway down the steps, turning to take in the sea of humanity before her. In that silence, the weight of the moment crystallized, and the narrator's voice carried over the scene like a truth too large to be confined to one chamber. She was not flawless, she was unyielding. And that was enough. The screen darkened, the last images lingering, hands raised, tears falling, voices shouting her name into the night. Then bold white text appeared across the black, "Justice survives only when defended." A final beat of silence held before Jasmine's gaze filled the screen one last time. Unflinching, unbowed. And then the closing line struck like a challenge, searing itself into the conscience of every viewer. If this was your fight, would you have stood up? The lesson of this story is that silence in the face of injustice is never neutral, it is surrender. Jasmine's fight reminds us that courage is not about being flawless, but about refusing to yield when truth is under attack. Justice lives only when ordinary people defend it, when families, workers, and communities refuse to be treated as collateral. Each of us has moments when standing up feels costly, but history shows the greater cost is silence. The question is not whether injustice exists, it does. The question is, when it comes for your voice, will you stand silent, or will you stand with justice? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.